Morning, everybody. Everybody hear me all right? Good, good, good. Nice to be in Brooklyn, the other New York. And unlike where I live, there's actually electricity here. So not only in the room, but everywhere, which is actually quite rare. As a denizen of Marin County, the only thing that works there are our hot tubs, which are, as you know, mandated by law. We're going to talk about the adaptive enterprise today, and what the heck is that? Well, the adaptive enterprise really is born out of a couple of things that we have all seen over the past 10 years or so. And over the past 10 years, and I've been in this business quite some time, we have had these waves of disruptive innovation come along, which really just puts everything behind it, or everything in front of it really, just mows it over. And smartphones, you could connect to anyone, anywhere. Cloud computing, deploying software applications globally. Data science and AI. I don't know what AI is, but I know I have to have it. And finally, anything as a service, and my favorite, service as a service. So optimizing real-world systems in real time. Now, what does that mean from an adaptation standpoint? Well, it means that there is tremendous leverage for capturing these waves. Just tremendous leverage for organizations that know how to do that. And this is not technology-led, it's people-led. All right? Competitive advantage is not created by technology. It is created by people who can use that technology. So that's takeaway number one. What happens when you miss waves? Remember these companies? Rena's talked about a few others, right? Now, I'm dating myself just purposely here. I was a child when Data General was around. But they missed a wave. Digital up in Boston, Sun, Atari, Netscape, Novell, Kodak, and Xerox, both of them headquartered in Rochester, New York, which makes me think that there's something in the water there. And finally, BlackBerry and Borders. All of these companies are either no longer or they're shells of their former selves. This is missing waves. This is failure to adapt. So we have this perfect storm, right? As you saw in the movie. These guys knew a lot about fishing, but not much about sailing and navigation. You actually don't try to outrun hurricanes. Bad idea. So what you have to do is adapt, or find, in this case, find safe shelter for them. So what that means is you adapt, you evolve, and you repeat. This is a virtuous cycle or virtuous circle that now every single organization must do. And yet, we're very, very uncomfortable doing this. Human beings don't like to change. Or we want other people to change first. Or as we sometimes say of our clients, we really want to change just so long as it doesn't involve change. Okay? So why don't you guys change first, right? Well, the problem is you can no longer escape. So there are far too many people that are nibbling at the heels of every organization that we see who can change because they're not brought up with all the legacy of the past. So digital transformation is the word that you hear about all the time. Welcome to New York. Just wouldn't be the same, would it? Digital transformation is a race to make three core experiences more responsive, more collaborative, more transparent, more efficient, just better. And if you look at those core experiences, they are employee-facing, they are customer-facing. Both of those are well in process, and you see a lot of companies that have devoted themselves to that particular service. The supplier and the partner experience, though, is still in flux. We still have a situation where many of the things that we do in terms of our business relationships, both informal and formal, are really being driven, automated, governed by rules, regulations, technology that is decades old. And that simply isn't going to make it anymore if all of these things are going to run in harmony. So what holds digital transformation initiatives back? Well, it's certainly not money. I mean, this is a major, as consultants say, this is a secular change in the industry. Meaning there's a whole lot of money being spent behind it. And so this is something that is unavoidable. There is more money being spent on this by orders of magnitude that was spent on, remember Y2K and what was going to happen to the world back in 2000? Well, I think we're a little bit more sanguine about how we're approaching this, and yet, this is still a problem. Why? If you look at the research, and we look at tons of it, and we talk to lots and lots of people. We have lots of clients. We talk to our clients' customers all the time. We talk to their partners. What holds these things back? We don't simply know what the outcome is. We know that we have to do this, but we don't know what the outcome actually is going to be. We don't know what nirvana or the end state looks like. We have all kinds of means to change just so long as it doesn't involve change. Because actually what we bought years ago is not really very good at change. That's why we bought it. We didn't want it to be good at change. We wanted to lock down unruly processes that we had to lock down anyway. We have tons of data. We have scads of it. We have terabytes, petabytes, zettabytes of data. None that I can use, of course, but we have it. Right? It's all out there, but we're not really knowing how to get at it. And finally, I'd like to change, but I want you to change first. Right? Then our organization will change because, as you know, that's the way that works. So digital transformation has a lot that stands in its way, and this failure to adapt, this failure of human beings to adapt to these sorts of things is creating what we are calling the digital transformation delusion. So the delusion is that if I go digital, and again, I'm not quite sure what all that means, but if I spend a lot of money behind it, that is somehow going to transform my organization, my enterprise, my business into something that fundamentally it has not been. Now, if we invoke the concept, or one of the concepts that we find in physics, the concept of a change in state, when a liquid changes to a gas, that is a change in state, and vice versa, right? As opposed to a liquid being heated up, which is a change in status. Digital transformation is about affecting a change in state. It means going from one, again, mixing metaphors here, from one quantum to another quantum. It's going to change the processes as well, but failure to get to this change in state, you haven't really transformed, have you? You've evolved, perhaps. You've made things more efficient, but you haven't really gone to this next level. So digital transformation, the way that we look at it, is really built around three fundamental areas. The digital experience, aka what I see at the glass. Okay? What's my experience at the glass? The ecosystems that are built around that so that I can see other experiences at the glass. And then the data and the insights that come out of those kinds of experiences so that I can make better decisions, and I can do those in real time. Does that make sense? So there's kind of, there's not mystery around this in our view. You would think there is, given all the stuff that's written about it. But really what you're trying to do is push on all three of those things at the same time so that you effect this change in state. So you don't really want a strategy for all of these different organizations and all of these different functions, so quotes Harvard Business Review. You just really need a strategy for your business. that seems to say we need one strategy that is going to get us from this change in status. Yes, we want that, but we want a change in state. Okay? Now, some other things that stand in our way. Well, they are called what we call the great system of record companies. These are all organizations that are terribly, terribly important in the lives of really global enterprise, in the lives of global business, because these were the organizations that locked down these unruly processes and made them at least a way to say, that is where all of the information is stored in R3 over there. Well, can I get at R3? Oh, God, no. No, 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 no. No, that's the door that you do not go through. Only trained professionals go through that door. And you can imagine, we always used to, I tease the SAP people about this. Behind that door is this multi-headed hydra that is just this monster. And it's like, get back, right? Don't go through that door. That is a system of record, and you're not allowed to touch it. Okay? Well, we need those things. Don't kid yourself. But the unintended consequences of buying those things, they set the first bar on user experience. Ever used R3? No, of course you haven't. You have other things to do. You've been affected by it, and I'm not just picking on R3 here, right? But they conditioned how we behave. Enter consumerized IT. Enter a new wave of companies that basically have reset the bar on how we look at technology and how we use technology, and most importantly, what our expectation is around technology. Okay? Why do I have to use these things on the bottom, these SORs that just completely suck from a UI UX perspective, when I don't have to do that when I'm at home? You're going to hear more about that, by the way, from the next speaker. So when we are looking at making our transformation, making our adaptation, that adaptation is really being driven by the expectations of those companies on the top. And Salesforce did some research a couple of years ago that basically said over 70% of employees want to have the same kind of technology that they use in their home lives. Okay? And you would expect that. So the digital world is supposed to be frictionless, but the real world really isn't. And so digital transformation is about creating this adaptive enterprise. Okay? Literally not a name per se, but something that an organization is doing and doing all the time. Obviously, we have to give it a name. So we call it this notion of an enterprise that is constantly evolving, adapting, and repeating. And people within that organization are evolving, adapting, and repeating. And they're the ones, organizations that can do that, they're the ones that will survive as we go forward. Okay? It's not the strongest that survive, it's, so said Darwin, it is those most able to change that survive. So, an adaptive enterprise can be defined as that sort of organization, that kind of enterprise that has the capability to constantly evolve their business strategy relative to their technology capacity, and their technology capacity in turn evolves to that business strategy. And again, we come back to this notion of a virtuous cycle. As I adopt my strategy, as I evolve my strategy, my technology adapts in turn, and as my technology adapts in turn, I am able to evolve my business strategy. And this is how I get myself on a constant slope. So if we look at this, it wouldn't be a management consulting presentation without an XY coordinate plane. and some fancy lines on it. So forgive me, I'm required by law to do this. If we look at value to the business on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, we see our SORs down there, our legacy applications. By the way, that's not a pejorative. It just means they came before us, right? We see a business strategy evolution that is now advanced past that. And we see, God, wouldn't it be great if we could do all of these other things at the same time? Well, we call that a performance gap and a consumption gap. But we'll take it if we can just get the evolution to kind of mirror at the same time where our technology strategy is going. Yet many, many applications, particularly back office applications, aren't designed to do that. How could they be? We didn't need to do it as much then. There weren't all these forces impinging upon us to now have to adapt or fade. Does that make sense? So an adaptive enterprise tries to match these technology capabilities with a business strategy, and a business strategy with a technology capacity that does not evolve in kind of a sine wave, cosine wave, but rather in a much more linear fashion. So don't imagine that you can develop a strategy for the digital part of your business and leave the rest of it alone. You can't. It all has to go at basically the same pace. You may take different pieces of it and connect them in different ways, but increasingly what this means is connecting much more of the physical to the digital and the digital to the physical. So in some cases, some of these physical processes eventually become virtualized. So if you look at some examples, and again, we talk to lots and lots of customers, and we do so in a way that we don't bear who, we don't attribute names to any of these things, which means that many, many customers are really willing to, tell us exactly what they think. And we do this in the course of all of our customer or all of our client engagements. You start to look at people that are thinking very, very differently when using this adaptive enterprise idea. They're thinking very, very differently in how they have taken what they're responsible for, their particular process, and turning it into something different. So we had one individual, just to kind of put it into a more appropriate discussion for this group. We had one particular Fortune 500 manufacturing company who said basically, look, we're a manufacturing company. We have a plant for everything. I want a plant model for a lot of the paper that I churn out, right? And a lot of the paper that I churn out is associated with buying things. And I'd actually like to make it just as efficient as we can turn out widgets. And I'd also like to make it as fewer steps as necessary to turn out that widget. And so I'm going to look at a combination of a different set of technologies to be able to do that. A logistics company. You could probably guess who might one of these be. Basically told me, it might surprise you, but we buy lots of tires. Okay? We buy lots of tires, like millions of tires. Okay? And we buy millions more valve stems and all of the stuff that goes on trucks. And if we're doing this right, we don't have to warehouse tires and valve stems, because who wants to be the VP in charge of warehousing valve stems? Okay? What we want to know is, when is this thing going to go out? When are we going to need to get more tires? And we'll spin up one of our plants, not one of our plants, one of their suppliers' plants, and we'll have just-in-time tire production instead of warehouses full of tires. We're a logistics company. We want to roll on the tires, not store them. And then another one, how do you create a self-service capability in a financial services company where basically using that, some of the concepts that I showed you in that companies that we use at home, how do you do that such that there doesn't have to be gatekeepers in order to do a bunch of things that we do internally and increasingly we're doing externally with our customers? So how do we set that up in a way that is completely transparent, where people aren't managing things this way, right? It is much more of a holistic, I do this, you do this, we have complete transparency into what we're doing. There's rules that govern this, and we move on, as opposed to a more serial approach to doing this. So 3 examples of organizations that are using different sets of technology in order to adapt their own processes in such a way that those processes are not getting in the way of their business strategy. Their business strategy is actually able to evolve because some of those processes are rethought or stripped out. Make sense? So successful digital transformation really is built around better processes, changes in status, but more importantly, better outcomes, changes in state. And so if you're doing this in a really thoughtful way, you're building capabilities for the workforce of the future. Remember that all of the millennials coming into this workforce, or that are already here, don't know what a system of record looks like that was invented back in 1991. They don't know what that looks like. They don't care what that looks like. They just have to use the technology that's associated with attaching to that. And it better be good. You give current tools, having said what I just did, you give current tools and processes an upgrade. Okay? So maybe you don't need all of these things. By the way, recessions have a way of stripping out processes, don't they? Right? Because all of a sudden, that thing that we bought a couple of years ago, that turns out that that's a nice to have, not a need to have. So we're going to have to do this anyway, but let's do it for the right reasons. Competitive advantage is not created by technology, it's created by people. So let's provide them the means to generate new ideas unconstrained by technology capacity. And finally, let's give people ways to work in brand new ways. Let them reinvent jobs. Let them reinvent processes. Let them reinvent whole functions, entire organizations. And when we can do that effectively, we have an adaptive enterprise. A change in state as well as a change in status. Does that all make sense? It's a lot to take in a very short period of time, but you have a very, very, very busy day. With that, I will yield the floor. Thank you very much for your attention.